Snow-covered peaks in summer are a hint we're heading to somewhere different. A place the Chinese named Xizang, or Western Treasure, but everyone else calls Tibet. The outside world believes Tibet is a peaceful spiritual nation oppressed by the invading communists. The Chinese say to the contrary, they've liberated Tibet from oppression, replacing feudalism with progress.
Thank you.
The Chinese government only allows a few groups of journalists into Tibet each year. The itinerary has been arranged for us, and we're not allowed to meet any people who oppose Chinese rule. In short, the agenda is to show us just how well China is looking after Tibet.
It's a matter of weeks before President Clinton visits Beijing, and China wants Tibet to look good. My fellow travellers are 2 American networks, a TV agency, and 2 minders from the Chinese-controlled Tibetan Autonomous Region government. For each of the 6 days, the schedule is tightly packed from morning till night. On the agenda today, a visit to an ordinary Tibetan home. A gaggle of journalists invade the 4-room flat belonging to an old lady, but she's out. Our minder explains.
She's not here. She went to her relatives, but has not come back. Yes. I sent someone to try to find her.
So I think for your correspondent to find a family very unprepared, nothing, just go directly. Visiting may be more interesting.
Can we do that? Also, of course, we're coming in force here, so just by sheer numbers, we falsify and make uncomfortable, unnatural anything that could possibly evolve out of this.
But 20 minutes later, old Pubu walks in, the picture of poise. She doesn't bat an eyelid despite 4 intrusive cameras in her living room. And why would she? After all, she's here to parrot the party line. And in case she's forgotten, she gets a reminder in Tibetan, which no one else here understands.
So life is much better now with China ruling Tibet than it was before?
In translating her words, the government minder embellishes what Pubu says. He makes the past sound unbearable.
Especially all of my children, they have got the jobs, but in the old days, it is impossible for them. Of course, when at that time, almost they were very young, yes. But I know the society, such a dark society.
But now it seems life is quite reasonable. She even has a certificate in Marxist studies on her wall.
I'm just wondering, how come she came to study Marxism or?
But away from the government minders, it is possible to scrape away a layer of propaganda. "47 years after what China calls the peaceful liberation of Tibet, the capital Lhasa looks like a badly designed Chinatown. While other provinces try to restrict the arrival of migrants to stop them taking jobs from the locals, Tibet actively encourages it. Officially, there are 35 Tibetans to every Chinese, but to the observer, Lhasa's ratio feels more like 3 to 1. The Chinese soak up the street space. The Potala Palace is the former residence of the Dalai Lama and Tibet's most famous landmark. But even here, the Chinese invasion continues, an insult to Tibetan sensibilities. A playground for the rich kids in the most indiscreet of places. China says this is progress.
In 1994, President Jiang Zemin authorized the biggest injection of state aid to Tibet, $287 million for 62 long-term projects. It's China's attempt to export an economic boom to its far western frontier, using wealth to achieve what force has so far failed to do.
Day 2, and off to a showcase Tibetan craft factory where the women sew traditional boots for $1.50 a day. Financially, their lives are better than ever before, but an illegal picture of the Dalai Lama hanging above the workshop is a sign they're missing something. When the minders turn their backs, a brief moment of truth. Their lives are not complete without their God King. The women are unable to withhold their emotions. The Buddhist religion remains the glue that holds Tibetan dreams together. It's the cornerstone of Tibetan identity, but an impediment to China's goal of integration. After attempting to quash Buddhism in the Cultural Revolution, China has turned to conservation, with a program to rebuild some of the key monasteries. Drive from Lhasa, winding nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, is the remote, sprawling Gagging Monastery. In its heyday before the Chinese occupation, 3,300 saffron robes flowed through these halls. Today, because of a government decree limiting their numbers, there are fewer than 500. 2 years ago, when relations between China and the Dalai Lama worsened, a ban on displaying Dalai Lama photographs erupted into protests. Human rights groups say several monks died during the unrest and hundreds were arrested.
Here at Gagging Monastery was where some of the worst violence occurred, and the monastery had to be closed for several days. The Chinese authorities ousted the troublemakers and then began a campaign to politically re-educate Tibet's 46,000 monks, a campaign that continues to this day.
Xiao Denzeng is a former monk and now second in command of Gandhen's Democratic Work Committee.
Can you tell me about the problems in 1996?
96年5月，当时这个个别喇嘛冲击了我们机关有些在寺庙保卫的这个保卫干事和他寺庙在工作的这个宗教干事。
Did any of the monks go to jail?
有个别的。当时关了个20来个人。
These democratic committees are government units set up in every monastery at the time of the disturbances. They shadow and check the monastic leadership, running classes in patriotism, which every monk must attend.
他们过去这个国家的法律，这个党的政策不太懂，所以他们有的时候就违背了国家的法律。现在他们学了法律，学了这个国家的政策，所以的话，他们就是开展这个正常的宗教活动。他也知道宗教是自由。
The government claims political education has won over the monks. But during a visit to the Potala Palace, a monk hands me a scrap of paper. It reads, "Tibet is not Chinese, please help us." At great risk, the monk agrees to talk to us outside the palace. It's too dangerous to wear his robes.
If you are against the Dalai Lama, you can stay in the palace forever.
Yes, that's right.
Do all Tibetans love him?
Yes, we Tibetan people all love him. Many monks, they are still afraid to Chinese government. So
Are you afraid?
I'm not afraid.
There are others who will not renounce the Dalai Lama, but instead choose to ignore politics. They call themselves realists who accept Chinese rule. Tashi Tsering is one of them.
Tibet was really quite an isolated place, wasn't it? Before the Chinese opened it up.
Well, yes, indeed, it was.
As a young boy in the 1930s, he came from a rural family to join the Dalai Lama's dance troupe, and from there became the sexual favourite of an influential monk. This was once an accepted form of advancement for a teenage boy without means. It has blackened his view of the old society.
And I disagree with what was going on in our own government. So corrupted, and I hate.
Later, he studied in the United States and was jailed on his return to Tibet in the 1960s, accused of being a spy and independence advocate.
I ran into such a great disaster,
The Cultural Revolution.
Cultural Revolution. This was the historical disaster, nightmare. Therefore, accidentally, I ran into this kind of situation. As soon as I was thrown into jail, immediately I thought, today here I'm in prison, I'm sure someday I will be out.
For Tashi, there is real economic benefit from Chinese rule. It has made his business better. He sells traditional Tibetan carpets to Westerners living overseas.
Therefore, I feel when I have been doing all these businesses, my money is coming from very clean source.
The proceeds from his carpets go towards building much-needed schools for children in the countryside. The shortage is a hangover from the old society when education was the sole preserve of the monasteries.
This looks like a very poor area.
It is, indeed.
Since 1990, Tashi has built 46 schools in his home county of Namling, 6 hours away. The government hasn't built enough, so Tashi makes up the shortfall. We weren't permitted to film the schools.
So why is your schools program so necessary when China is doing such a good job with Tibetan education?
The Tibetan educational standard is so low everywhere.
Still so low?
Oh yes, so low everywhere. Like my generation, maybe most of them are illiterate. For instance, my wife, Sanjala, she is my age, and she is illiterate, you see.
Tashi's wife Sangela runs a lounge serving one of Tibet's favourite drinks, a barley-based alcohol called chang. Tashi says that despite Sanghela's illiteracy, she contributes to society and pays her taxes.
Chang business is her business, and she is very expert making Chang, and at the same time, she is very, very well trained to receive, customers like this.
She's a good hostess.
Oh, good hostess, yes, good hostess.
He has a less flattering view of his fellow Tibetans, who claim the influx of Chinese is taking away jobs.
20 years ago, there were a lot of Tibetan shoe menders around my house. But now there was none, full of Chinese, because they are very, very hardworking people. Like myself, I can compete with any Chinese to do anything. And I'm doing very well. Why not the other Tibetans cannot do that?
Even though these words may be just what the minders have ordered, they do raise legitimate views about the future of Tibet. People like Tashi Tsering are impatient for Tibet's modernization. For them, a return to the feudal past is a misplaced dream. And it's something Tashi says many outside Tibet don't understand.
To me, Western understanding on the whole, it's some kind of fantasy, some kind of Shangri-La story.
Is the Dalai Lama propagating that view that Tibet is a Shangri-La?
To me, in many ways, he's a very, very realistic man. And at some point, he said that, maybe my reincarnation is the last. He says that I'm not God, I'm a human being. I'm a priest, a good Buddhist priest. Whereas we, great many Tibetans think that he is something totally different from us, not human beings, it's God.